Hi, I'm Brandon Briscoe, and welcome to another episode of The Postscript, Living Faith Bible Institute's weekly podcast and YouTube series devoted to interviewing pastors and professors from the Living Faith Bible Institute and across the Living Faith Fellowship. And every week we come together with the hope that the conversations that we're having on the show are ministering to you, strengthening, edifying, and that you're getting insight into topics such as theology, missions, ministry. And this week we're going to be talking about COVID. Now, I know all of you are very done with talking about COVID, and so I want to apologize in advance, but I think the spin of today's conversation is super important, and that's this. How has COVID impacted missions? I think we're still just on the tail end of the pandemic, and I think a lot of us are reflecting on how things changed in ministry, particularly in our local churches. Lots of things have changed over the last few months. But how has it impacted missions specifically? How has it changed the way that we see things? How is it influencing us and how we move forward? And what does missions look like moving forward? I think it's really important for us to have this conversation and prepare ourselves so that we remain missions minded in the future years to come. And so I've invited a friend of mine, Pastor James Fyffe, a missionary to Southeast Asia and professor of the missions classes here at Living Faith Bible Institute, to talk to us about all of the things that have changed since the pandemic and how we should be looking at that. So welcome, man. We really appreciate you being here again.
That's good.
So today we're going to be talking about COVID, obviously. Let's just start by addressing how COVID has impacted missions over this last year. Like if you could just give us a general perspective of how COVID has affected just missions as a whole, just the broad picture, and then we'll dive down deeper into other aspects of the pandemic and how it's going to impact us moving forward.
Sure. Yeah. So initially I think COVID was awesome, actually.
Yeah. Explain that.
It was really good. In probably March last year when people started having to work from home, what I think what a lot of people found is that everybody was outside, like neighbors were out. I actually started meeting a lot of neighbors that I'd never met before, and everyone's like, this is really cool.
Yeah.
We get to be at home all day,
Sure.
and I can do my work in half the amount of time. And so, it was a great few weeks initially. I still have relationships that I made then that are ongoing now, opportunities to continue to minister because of that short window there. Unfortunately, it was just a short window. And then all of a sudden people were like, wait, I have more time for video games, and started, becoming reclusive again. And then the mandates to isolate and separate kicked in, and quickly, people dove back into their holes and stayed there.
Right.
So, so then it shifted and ministry and missions became difficult at all levels. The mission became difficult. In those first few weeks, I would say that the mission, even, to my neighborhood, became a lot easier. And I got the opportunity to share the gospel. I met people. Once that changed, once the lockdowns came.
And the fear settled in. And
yeah. Either the fear, or for a lot of people, there was fear. That was a big part of it. And I think for some, it was like, well, I have more time to do what I actually want to do.
Right.
You would think that America would have become healthier because we were heading into summer and everyone had all this free time, but no, we didn't. We all just locked ourselves in our house. And
so had groceries delivered to our house and ate Doritos.
Right. We never had to move.
Yeah.
I mean, if you tipped the guy enough, he'll deliver it to your couch. You wouldn't even stop at the door.
Right. It's true.
And so obviously that makes missions very, very difficult. On the local level, just you getting out and meeting your neighbor, it couldn't happen.
Yeah.
And same thing happened all around the world. So, missionaries who were on the field lost contact to the people they were there to reach. And then as borders closed, that brings some obvious difficulties.
Yeah, explain that.
Because
I knew that certain nations closed their borders. But explain the actual impact, because it happened in stages in different places. It didn't happen immediately. Or explain the immediate impact on a foreign missionary on the field, or someone who's trying to get on the field in that moment. There was a lot of missionaries who had to postpone their going because of this. So explain that a little bit, the closed borders issue.
Yeah, so if you were already on the field and you saw what was going on around the world, there were some people that said, well, this is the perfect time to get out of the country, maybe take a furlough that we need, or out of fear. Some would have said, well, I don't necessarily want to be trapped in this country. if COVID comes.
Yeah, there's a lot of uncertainty, and so if I can get back home, in my where the rope holders are, if you will,
sure,
then there's more safety there.
Yeah, and so if we compare that back to the beginning of this modern missions movement, which we've talked about, one thing that we didn't say is those guys often shipped all their belongings in a coffin when they went. The average lifespan of a missionary to Africa was 2 years at that time.
Wow.
And missionaries went with the mindset that we're going to die on this field. Travel got a lot easier now. Like we can get anywhere in a few hours.
Yeah. And
so it's good to get breaks, and it's good to come back and visit. But again, in terms of the way the pendulum is swung, maybe we do too much of that. And a willingness to abandon the mission field has kind of crept in. So, it's going to get difficult. I'm in a place where the medical system's not as good. I'm going to go back to America, and I'll come back when it's a little more convenient.
Yeah.
So there was some of that.
Okay.
I'm not whitewashing all missionaries who left.
Sure.
There
was many different reasons.
Yeah. So if you were on the field, some left. And then again, some got stuck in a lockdown situation. I had friends who were in Europe who they said it was super strict there. They couldn't leave the house except for one person one time a day. And they had a daily voucher. If you went out, you had to actually be carrying a pass to prove to somebody that you had the right to be out. And you had a 1 hour window to do everything that you could do and get it done. So this guy was telling me his kids were actually now fighting over who got to take the trash out just so they could walk out of the trash to the end of the driveway, and set the trash out. That's how lockdown was. And so, you think about that in terms of reaching your neighbors. You can't.
Yeah. And you're almost like a missionary is almost like a small business owner. It's there's no business.
Right.
What do there's no one to come in contact with. And so you've just you're playing a waiting game.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Yeah. And so a lot of them did. They said, we'll just hunker down here. We're with these people. And so we'll ride it the way that they ride it out.
Yeah.
But in terms of back to the border closing specifically, it's like waves of the ocean, and it just kind of rolls its way around the world. There are different places that are closing and opening their borders at different times, and we're still seeing it. Here we're 15 months removed from the initial impact here in America. So you still have India, really high levels of COVID right now. Costa Rica closing borders, and different countries at different times opening and closing.
Do you know anybody that went on the mission field in the midst of COVID?
I do.
During the pandemic?
Yeah.
What was that like?
Difficult. You had to time it right. You had to try to catch either one of those windows where your country had an open border and would let you get in, or perhaps you had a special gift set that allowed you to get in. So, back to the idea that missions has shifted towards humanitarian work. A lot of humanitarians were able to get into countries that needed their skills.
They had access that other people didn't have.
But, if you didn't have that, then you just had to time it right. But, our friend, Kale, made it onto the mission field, over the past year. And, a lot of that is just the providence of God.
Right.
Our friend, Mike Renault, was able to leave Kansas City and settle into Boston, which was a much more closed community than ours in terms of the impact of COVID.
The Carters.
Yeah. Yep. The Browns.
Yep.
So they just went
to Ireland
a couple weeks ago.
Yeah.
So we're still in COVID world, and missionaries are still getting on the field.
Yeah,
but it has made it difficult.
So what's it like when they get there? I mean, is it still a lot of it's slow moving? It's not like they can hit the ground running.
Yeah. So, this will impact missionaries who go long-term. The Browns landed in Ireland, and they're immediately into a 2-week quarantine. And that's typically how it's going to go. So initially those first 2 weeks, which, in some ways is actually good for you to work through your jet lag, depending where you're going, make some slow cultural adaptations and just kind of settle in. But you have this mandatory time where you have to quarantine. But then once you're out of quarantine, the countries that are still more locked down, it's that same idea. You can't get out. You can't start building relationships.
Right.
You're not going to the gym or to the park or wherever you would go to meet people because they're not there.
It in some ways, it makes you desperate. I really like the idea of asking God to make a way. It's a season of prayer and beseeching. That God would make a way and make you fruitful when the season is prime.
Yeah.
It's tough being in the wilderness, but it's such a great opportunity to rely on the Lord. I'm sure there's a lot of benefits some of these folks have just gotten on the mission field in terms of just trusting God for the unknown.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Very true. And in terms of shifting gears a little bit, just with that idea of still the lockdowns and the quarantine zone, in terms of short-term missions.
Yeah. And this is a question I do want to get to, and I want to ask. Let me ask the question, because I think that there's a lot of different things that I want you to talk about in this umbrella. So obviously, you're a missions pastor here at Midtown, and so every church has probably handled things a little bit differently. But there are things that we've had to change, like missions. The last year, as far as MBT goes, has looked a lot different than it has in years past. And so let's just start with the short-term missions trips, because we're a short-term mission trip loving group of people. I mean, we've got a large young adult ministry, and the expectation has always been that everybody finds some missions trip every year to go on, to go see the field, to be an asset, to evangelize, whether it be foreign or local. And so maybe talk a little bit about the idea of short-term trips and how COVID impacted that, and how we had to adapt.
Yeah. So every Christian should go on a mission trip, period.
Yeah.
Like I'm making that broad of a statement.
You're pretty firm on that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's a big deal too.
Yeah. Seeing different cultures, seeing different parts of the world, allowing, God to challenge you, even on short-term trips. And short-term trips birth a lot of long-term missionaries. So they're vital.
And back to the idea of rope holders, it makes for really great rope holders. So even if you're not the one, you've seen the people, you've looked them in the eyes, you know that they're living souls. They're not just an idea.
Exactly.
It changes you. It forever impacts you.
You know how to pray better for India than I do.
Yeah.
So in terms of short-term missions, they all but got shut down internationally. As you're trying to cross borders, again, they're closed, or you have all of these quarantine in place type of mandates. So if you're trying to go do a 1 week work in Spain, for example, you land there and you have to do a mandatory 2 week quarantine before you can do your 1 week worth of work. But then coming back to the US, there's been a lot of re-entry quarantines as well. So you've got a mandatory 2 week quarantine on the backside. So now you're 5 weeks to get 1 week's worth of work on the field.
Wow.
In a country that's pretty closed down.
Yeah. There's not a whole lot of incentive to do that.
Right.
I mean, financially, it's hard. Time-wise, it's hard. People have lives. People have vocations that they've got to get back to.
It's just not practical.
No. So people weren't doing that. So then what did it look like? I mean, how did people adapt and change? Missions obviously didn't stop. People focused other ways. What were some of the solutions that we came up with as a church in order to help people on the field?
Yeah, I think one of the great things that did come out of COVID was creativity. Because of this conversation we're having, it forced us to start thinking, a little outside the box. And we, with Vietnam as our kind of pilot in terms of international missions.
Yeah, explain that for listeners who aren't familiar with the potential work in Vietnam.
Sure. So we've had teams that have been going to Vietnam for close to 5 years now, a couple times a year in and out. And we've had, a missionary friend, Doug Pearson, who's in that area and has been in Vietnam too, has kind of made some of those connections. While we were over there, Andrew Ong was able to lead some people to the Lord. Pastor
of International Student Ministry here at Midtown.
Yeah. So him and his team led some people to the Lord, and these people just latched on to the truth of the word. And, Andrew has been discipling a few different people via Zoom, actually, for a couple of years now.
Yeah, before COVID even.
Before COVID.
Yeah.
But also going about twice a year, we were sending groups to supplement that. And with the idea is that we're working towards planning a church. And Andrew might have led the pastor to the Lord, or maybe Andrew himself will go to be the pastor.
Right.
Both of those things
are working through what that looked like.
Yeah. And so it was working well because we got to, be face to face with them a few times a year and send large groups and help them out. So for the past year, we've canceled, 2 different trips to Vietnam, but in its wake, that we've been able to continue with Zoom. And we've actually, while it's not ideal, it's not in any way what we would teach, in terms of discipleship. in terms of the reality of transfer of life and relational components of discipleship. It's hard to do, but we've actually found that it's still working.
Yeah.
As a Zoom is not perfect, but it's really good.
And one of the things that you oversee here at Midtown is mission support. Mm-hmm. And I think with people growing more comfortable with internet connectivity and speaking to a screen, I think we've begun to emphasize the support aspect of our missions more. Mm-hmm. And we've connected more with a lot of these potential church planters and people who are on the field. I think we more often are connecting with them, which is probably for them just as beneficial than seeing us once or twice face-to-face a year, even though that's great. But that weekly, connection is way better in some ways because it refreshes them.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the technology that is, already in place and has really become more robust because of COVID has helped in that aspect a lot. This past week I was, face-to-face on my phone with LSAO, our friend in Spain. I'm on WhatsApp with Chris Tadas and with Ganesh, in India. And then I'm emailing with Doug Howie in Romania. And just in a week's time, I can look at or talk to and quickly interact with a lot of missionaries and encourage them or get their prayer requests and find out what's going on. So that has been really good.
Yeah, we're all learning how to do that better.
Oh, yeah. I mean, even as a church, we were 6 weeks closed as Midtown Baptist Temple when the government mandated that. And so we quickly all got online and found ways to stay connected and prayed quickly that we could get back together. Yeah. Because that's ideal. But, even over the last year, we've seen Bible studies grow. We've seen new Bible studies started. We've seen disciples made. We've seen, a lot of people coming to Christ and getting connected into our Bible studies, and even sometimes through an online component first before they're even brought in to a Bible study and then into a fellowship and then into the church.
Hey, thank you so much for listening to the show. We're going to pause right here for just a second so we can hear from one of our students from the Living Faith Bible Institute.
Hi, my name is Carly Weber, and I am a student at LFBI. LFBI has consistently been used of the Lord to meet me where I'm at in whatever season and to draw me closer to Him. Every class that I've taken so far has very distinct takeaways that I counsel from, that I look back on, that have changed my relationship with the Lord. He is using it to mold me into the woman of God who He needs me to be to get His work done. And through that, I'm learning how to discern better in the world that I live in, how to better understand the world that I live in, and how to fight with my weapon, the Word of God, in this battle that's all spiritual and none physical. I will look back on these classes for the rest of my life.
To enroll for classes, visit lfbi.org. To support LFBI, please visit lfbi.org/support. We had a young man just get saved who his first few interactions last January with our church were on Zoom. I mean, he didn't know anybody. He was invited into a Zoom Bible study, and that was his first form of participation. And then he ended up, within a year or so, accepting Christ. So big deal, big deal. So here's another question that's kind of related to that. It's more about like the impact of the pandemic. Do you perceive that that there is going to be a greater focus on local and national missions in the coming years, behind COVID? And, for instance, we planted a church in the midst of COVID. Living Faith Boston is an example of a national church plant here in the U.S. and God's working. God's doing an awesome thing in that. There's so much to say about that. But do you think that there might be some reasonable trepidation or limitations on international missions? Do you think that there'll be maybe a resurgence in terms of church planting and focus here nationally, and what does that look like?
Yeah, I do think so, because it is harder to get into other countries. And for a while, it was even that way going state to state. Now that is all lifted here, so it's a lot easier to go state to state now. But again, in the past year, we've built relationships with a church that is being planted in Laramie, Wyoming. And Dallas. Right now, again, via Zoom. We're leading a Bible study there every other week, but there's people there in person that are also meeting in Denver. So for us, at least for Midtown, and I think we'll see a lot of this from churches who still have a heart for the mission. We'll go, well, when God is shutting one door, or if Satan is shutting one door, whoever's shutting a door, there's always another door opening up. And God's mission will keep moving forward. So, I think we'll see people reinvesting into their own neighborhoods. Again, Kaya Bible studies have multiplied. That's a missions endeavor that has grown locally during COVID.
Yeah. So is there a warning that comes with that, though? Because, obviously you can kind of lose track for the broader vision to reach the world. So what's the warning that comes with, the evangelical church focusing its attention on local or national missions? How do we protect ourselves from getting inbred in that way?
Yeah. So we're having, our own kind of new scientific revolution with the proliferation of knowledge and technology lately, and new enlightenment with the new thinking. So again, taking us back to where we came through history. And it's going to be real easy for us to get just, again, comfortable. And this will push, kind of a more ethnocentric idea of church again. And that would be the danger of swinging that pendulum all the way back to where it was in Carey's day, where the Church of England was like, well, we're good as the Church of England, and we'll strengthen one another, but everything else is on their own. I think that's the danger of where we will swing.
Yeah.
And historically, we're looking like we've set the same stage, or Satan has.
So how do we protect against that? I think one of the big things for us is just making sure missions is a constant conversation in our church, mission focus conference, like our own missions conference, and continuing to reiterate the significance of reaching the world is God's grand vision for the Great Commission. So what are some other ways in which we can continue to emphasize foreign missions work?
Yeah, it's going to come just through persistence in reading the Bible and praying, because God's heart is for the nations, and you can't escape that. You can't go very far in the Bible without recognizing that. So as long as you have God's heart, you're going to have a love for the Word, and you're going to have a love for souls, and that's going to transcend those that are by me, and it's going to drive us to do things that are hard. And so keeping that heart, and I think, like you said, an important part is going to be to stay connected with like-minded believers and have intentional times where we will talk about missions. So we do that in our church at Mission Focus, but we have a missionary prayer night, 8 times a year on our Tuesday night. So almost a little more than every other month, right? And that is with the intentional purpose of putting our focus on the nations and keeping it out there. So, people like me and you will have to keep just sounding that alarm and pushing the people to say, we can't get comfortable here.
No. Yeah. Comfort, fighting against comfort is a big deal.
Yeah.
So, back to the idea of pushing a foreign missions agenda and continuing to beat that drum. What do you anticipate that people are going to have to consider going on the foreign mission field that they didn't before? So things that we maybe took for granted or never had to think about. If someone was want to go plant a church, wherever it may be, India, Latin America, Europe, somewhere, things that we would have never considered before. What are we thinking about now? What do we have to know going into those places in the future?
Yeah. The mindset of people has changed. We see it, in America, anxiety has had a 3-fold increase, depression a 4-fold increase in the last year, suicide is up, and that is showing true across large portions of the world. Yeah. So a new equipping is needed for our missionaries to be ready to be more tuned in to the mental state of the people. So better counselors. We need to equip and send better counselors because that's not going to change. That's not going to change because masks aren't going to go away anytime soon. A lot of travel restrictions aren't going to go away. So COVID-19 is kind of winding down. We're vaccinated now, and in a lot of ways we're opening up. Yeah. I saw an article 2 days back about H5N8, a new influenza. Just the timing of it's interesting. COVID's winding down. They're putting out this new article, and they said, it's coming. This is the next pandemic, and it's going to be worse than COVID. So COVID, to go a different direction for just a minute, is a setup. It's a test run. It's a preparation for an Antichrist to come, and certain things that need to be in place in this world. How well can we get an entire world to follow the orders of very, very few? And it's been a test run, and we've seen real quickly that people are with a little bit of fear and a little bit of science, or perhaps science falsely so called, wherever you want to stand on that.
Right.
People are willing to jump in and say, no, this is real. We have to do what they say.
Yeah.
To the extent that in some places, even in our own country, reports from just our friends in Boston, people are hating their friends and their neighbors over issues like a mask.
Yeah.
Right. And so people are just like, okay, I have to get into this. All right. So Satan is setting us up.
Yeah.
And God is setting us up. God is preparing this place. So the mindset of people is changing. You're going to have a harder time, I think, getting individuals. We're becoming a very collective mindset as a whole, a societal mindset. When we talk about the need for individual salvation, that's going to be very difficult.
Yeah.
I think missionaries and even church planners local.
That's a really interesting idea.
Yeah.
So you're saying that culturally we're moving back to more of a collective way of thinking, which is the way people thought pre-modern missions.
Yeah.
That Christianity and salvation was some sort of a familial or tribal, for good or bad, you think about like a guy like Cornelius or Lydia or people of influence in Scripture, they get saved, their whole house gets saved because everyone's so greatly impacted by the tribal nature, the familial nature of the community. So there's benefit as long as the gospel's at the center of it. These people have patriarchs and matriarchs have great influence. But so you're saying that if we get more locked down and we're more submitted to the cultural leanings of our community, that there's a danger of us becoming more thinking about our faith more in terms of tribes versus individual salvation. That's an interesting thought.
Yeah, I think so. I think we'll become very tribal, and the tribe will expand out to big things like those who are willing to follow the agenda and those who aren't.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay, that sounds like a whole nother episode.
That would be
okay. So other things that you're seeing in terms of the effects.
In terms of the effects, so we need to be equipping people with a whole new mindset and increasing our ability to counsel. I think it's going to be, back to the idea of where missions has been swinging towards humanitarianism. That's going to ramp up even more. Actually, in terms of the world, it's going to be very few. It's going to be local church driven. It's going to be people like us who hold to the idea that we must send the gospel. That's going to actually be attacked even more and more.
So you're saying maybe you're implying that as local churches, we need to make sure that people are trained vocationally in areas that are befitting to the needs of other countries. So whether it be nurses, doctors, English as second language, whatever it might be. Those are big areas in which we need to continue to emphasize.
And probably not even English. It's going to really shift towards, I think, things that are really medically driven, fixing humanity. So you're right. Preparing ourselves for that. So that will influence, our junior high, high school, college age people into how they prepare for life. If missions is on your horizon, then you have to consider getting equipped to get you there, because missions is going to be humanitarian first and foremost.
Okay. What about vaccinations in terms of preparing for that? I know that there's a lot of vaccinations in certain countries where here are recommendations of vaccinations. Are they going to get more strict with vaccinations, do you believe, moving forward? Is there going to be more of them? The number of shots that I had to get in order to go to India was exceptional. Imagining that increasing to maybe 15 or 20 different shots that you might get. Your body becomes a little chemistry lab. So what do you think about that? Is that a big deal? Should we be concerned about that?
It will increase. COVID vaccines will probably become mandatory, especially in certain areas. It's already mandatory for me as a healthcare worker to take certain vaccines every year. You have to get the flu shot. You have to get, hepatitis. Certain things have to stay up to date. As you said, travel already as recommendations or requirements for vaccines. So it will come very soon. There will be more and more. And again, there's a whole other kind of side of this that we could push it into that we won't today, in terms of how that, even that is setting us up for a regime to come. The ability to control how people move and where people move, the ability to even start tying all of life into whether or not, and we're already trying to do it even with a vaccination. We're saying things like, well, that you can't go to the grocery store. Well, It's not mandated yet, but we're kind of already saying you can't buy, sell, and eat unless you're vaccinated.
Yeah. There is a cultural component. There's a shaming factor that exists. We went shopping last night and I wasn't wearing a mask, and a woman grilled me in a friendly way about whether or not I'd been vaccinated. Like it was a big deal for her to know. Yeah. When it was really, it's not really her business, right, in my perspective. But it's a cultural thing that's setting us up for something that's more governmental and authoritarian in nature. Is this idea that if your body is not your own, your body houses your soul and your spirit. Like it's a vessel, and it has implications. And if your body is no longer your own and you don't have liberty over it, that's one step closer to giving over the most, personal aspects of who you are, the soulish parts of who you are. There's a lot of implications involved.
Oh, there. Yeah. I don't think we have time to go down that road.
No, we don't.
That's
no,
huge.
We have a lot of side trails here, but ultimately I want to know, maybe we can close this way, is what are the things that we need to be considering as we move into 2022, 2023, the years ahead of us? You talked about, man, what even junior high kids, what are the things that we as leaders, though, should be thinking about in order to prepare our people for what missions is going to look like? And I know that a lot of this is hypothetical or theoretical in nature, but what are some things that you foresee needing to be addressed as we continue to move forward, talking about missions and pushing the Great Commission?
Yeah, always a reiteration of the very beginning, or the very basic. Missions is the heart of God. God's heart. Even in the first 200 years of Christianity, missions was hard because of persecution, literally losing your life. Yeah. Missions is going to be hard for different reasons in the next 20 years. And but that doesn't change God's heart or the Great Commission or the individual call and responsibility of every believer to be engaged in the mission wherever you are and maybe be moved. The idea of getting properly equipped and equipping will take now, I think, more than just our biblical equipping, which we've been really good at. I think there will be some outside of of our strict biblical foundations. There'll be some equipping, like we already mentioned, that'll need to be talked about. The idea just that missions will be different and that we're still a part of it. It's just got to be reinforced over and over again. Yeah. So being creative and being able to roll with the waves that come.
Yeah. Can we adapt the way men like Hudson Taylor and William Carey did?
Yeah. Yeah. Shave half your head bald and wear a ponytail.
Why not?
Yeah.
Yeah. There's ways in which we can be flexible.
Yeah.
And if this is what God really wants us to do, we can, if we're going to obey him, if we love him and we're going to obey him, we'll make a way.
And then I think the last thing too, worth mentioning would just be the idea that we also need to probably encourage our people to, and trust our people to make informed, wise individual decisions on things that aren't really specific to the most important things. For example, getting vaccinated. Should we or should we not get vaccinated? At this point, I don't think it's my role as the pastor to tell you to get vaccinated or not. I think you need to make that decision, and I think I need to support that either way. But in light of the idea of missions, if a country requires you to get vaccinated, well, that's a cost we're going to have to count. Well, whatever your moral position is on it, or your big pharma, or whatever your agenda is against, are you willing even to take that cost in order to get the gospel somewhere else?
There's a risk either way that you have to count. And to leave it to the individual to say, hey, I'm following the Lord, I'm full of faith. Okay, well then you make the informed decision. We want to support you. We're the rope holders. Yeah, that's good. James, fantastic conversation. There's so much that we can talk about in terms of missions. I'm sure we will more in the future. But I want to thank you for being with us today, and we'll hang out again real soon. And we want to thank you as well for joining us for this missions conversation. Hopefully it was enlightening, caused you to consider things that maybe you haven't thought about yet, and maybe hopefully stirred in you a desire to learn more about missions. And that's why we offer courses on missions at LFBI, Living Faith Bible Institute. And we want to invite you to begin with the Introduction to Missions class with James Fyffe. He teaches that. And then again, like I mentioned before in other episodes, we are going to be rolling out more missions classes in the future. So keep an eye out for those classes that address church planting and missions prep, fundraising, things like that, things that are practical, but things that are also very doctrinal and inspirational in nature. But we want to invite you to be a part of that. So visit lfbi.org, check out our course load, consider any of our leadership classes, any of our Bible study classes. We would love for you to be a part of those. But again, as always, we hope that today was edifying and strengthening to you. We love you. We're grateful for you. And we can't wait to see you again next week. God bless.